Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training we are going to be going over coaching call number 12, which is titled the completion ritual. So we are going to go over the A to Z step by step so that way you can actually successfully go ahead and deliver your practice coaching call number 12. Let's go ahead and hop right into it. Of course, right now we are continuing our theme of putting your transformation program together inside of this module. Of course, we also do have the training outline available for you, and we are going to go ahead and jump into our normal intros as well. So of course, we are going to go ahead and start off with the pre-call ritual. If you are not doing this yet, okay, this is absolutely very important. I cannot tell you how many students we hear who give feedback for their partners who say, you know what, I sensed that my partner, when I was doing my practice coaching call, was a little bit all over the place. I sensed that my partner really wasn't having his head in the game, right? Or wasn't having her head in the game. And so that's what we're talking about when you have a pre-call ritual. You want to make sure that you are taking the time to actually ground yourself so that way you are in observer mode. Because I'm telling you, human beings are extremely perceptive. They know when somebody is not paying attention, when somebody's head is a little bit all over the place, especially in a coaching context. It is absolutely going to come across. So make sure that you are doing the practical preparation, the right before call mindset shifts that are very important to go ahead and do, as well as when you actually start the call. If you have not gone ahead and put together your own checklist yet, you want to make sure that you actually do that so that way you are properly grounded before every single one of your calls. And this applies not only when you are working with real students, whether that be paying students or practice students. This also applies to when you are working with your RWA students as well. Okay, so that is the pre-call ritual. Of course, I want to go ahead and emphasize the importance of organization equals organization again. So it is going to be very important to make sure that you are keeping all of your notes organized, especially here in practice coaching call number 12. You are going to see how absolutely critical all of the notes that you have been taking in all of the other coaching calls, especially the previous coaching call when you talk about the wheel of health and all of that kind of stuff. You're going to notice how you are actually going to be utilizing all of those notes when you are actually dealing with your students. So if you're not taking good notes, if you're not actually getting into the practice of developing the skill of taking good notes, you're going to see that it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to utilize a lot of the things that you've already spoken about with your student. From there, we go ahead and move on into the reminder about your practice training modules. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and emphasize this again and again and again. Remember, the purpose of module 5 is to go ahead and help you provide training wheels so that way you can get the reps in to actually find your voice. And so don't get married too closely to these specific topics because this is the done for you, do it yourself approach. We are going to be going ahead and customizing this for your students in the one-on-one model. So it's going to be very important for you to actually utilize all of this practice to actually find your confidence, to actually get the practice in, because ultimately that is what is going to allow you to be able to go from unconscious incompetence to realizing, oh snap, there's a lot of areas of improvement that I actually have with this, which is conscious incompetence. And then as you start to do more and more practice here throughout module 5, you're going to start to get to that conscious competence piece of things. And then from there, with enough practice and really working with real life students, practice partners, all of that, you are actually over time going to be able to get to the point of unconscious competence. Okay, so that is going to be very important for you to make sure that you are keeping in mind as you are going through this. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into practice coaching call number 12 and the overview of practice coaching call number 12, because inside of this practice coaching call, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be focusing on doing the completion ritual with your student, as well as potentially renewing the student as well. So the anatomy of this coaching call is going to look like, okay, part 1 is going to be typically what we're used to, the ritual of what's going well. Part 2, even though this is the last coaching call of the student's transformation program, we're still going to be coaching them on any obstacles that they might have had. And then this is where things might potentially get a little bit different. Okay, so part number 3 is where we actually do the completion ritual. And then part number 4 is what we call the modified strategy session. Now, you are only going to be doing part number 4 if you actually plan on continuing with your student. And then part number 5 is the action steps, which is obviously only if the student renews. You're not going to give action steps necessarily to a student who's not going to be renewing with you. And then finally, you have part number 6, which is closing the call, which has 2 different parts. If the student is renewing with you, then you have a version of the closing the call that is for that student. And then if the student is not renewing with you, then you have a version of the closing the call that is for that student. Okay, so this does not mean that you are going to be renewing with all of the students that you work with. Why is that the case? Because there are a couple different options that might actually end up happening here in coaching call number 12 that you want to be aware of, okay? So option number 1 is that maybe when you get to coaching call number 12, you still need to actually have the conversation with the student about renewing going forward, okay? So if that is the case, then what you're going to be doing here in practice coaching call number 12 is you are going to be doing both the completion ritual as well as the modified strategy session, okay? So you're going to be going ahead and walking the student through both the completion ritual as well as the modified strategy session, okay? Now, option number 2 is that potentially you might decide that you don't want to work with this student anymore, or maybe the student decides that they don't want to continue with you anymore, okay? So if that is the case, then you are going to be doing the completion ritual with the student. It's going to be slightly modified, slightly extended. I'm going to walk you through that here in just a second, but you are not going to be doing, obviously, the modified strategy session because you don't want to continue with this student, and I'll walk you through in what cases that might actually be the case in just a second here, okay? And then finally, option number 3, which may actually happen sometimes, is that maybe the student has already renewed with you. And so let's say, for example, when you were planting the seeds in maybe coaching call 9, coaching call 10, coaching call 11, then what ended up happening was the student said, you know what, I'm really enjoying this. You're planting the seeds, right? They might not say it in that language, but they say, you know what, I kind of get it. I understand what's going on. I want to go ahead and renew with you right now. I don't want this to end. And so if that is the case, then what you are going to go ahead and do is you're going to go ahead and do the completion ritual, but then obviously you would not be doing the modified strategy session with that student, okay? So those are a couple different options of what might end up happening here in practice coaching call number 12, and I'm going to walk you through the actual scripting and the explanation around it, but I wanted to walk you through the anatomy of it right now so you can really start to get an idea of, okay, the bird's eye view of what we're actually going to be talking about here in just a second, okay? Now, in terms of what are the actual scenarios and the situations where you might not actually want to work with the student anymore, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about that right now, okay? So there are times when you don't want to work with the student anymore. And if that's the case, then what's going to end up happening is that if you've decided, let's say, you're getting through coaching call 6 and coaching call 7, coaching call 8, and maybe some of these scenarios apply to your student, then what you're going to do is you're not going to seed the next program as much in coaching calls 9, 10, 11. You're not going to seed that, hey, we should go ahead and talk about, renewing and that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, you're not going to be doing the modified strategy session with that student either. Now, why is that going to be applicable? Well, that's applicable in a couple different situations. Number 1 is that if you realize that the student is not actually coachable, because the truth is that sometimes there are going to be students who come into your program, right? It's kind of like you're having that trial run, the marriage trial run, right? The first kind of transformation program is where you're seeing, okay, hey, is this a good student who wants to work with me? And am I a good fit for this student as well, right? So it's kind of like you're trying and seeing how things are working out. And the truth is that you're going to have some students who join your program and maybe they go through the first transformation and you come to the end of that and you're like, man, I really dread having to work with them. Or maybe even the student realizes that you guys are just not a good fit, right? Maybe your coaching style isn't a good fit for that student, right? And so if the student is maybe draining, exhausting, it feels like every single coaching call is a struggle, then that is a very good indication that that is not going to be a student that you actually want to renew, right? So if that is the case, then you can absolutely choose not to work with the student going forward, okay? So that is the first situation. The second situation here is that potentially maybe the student needs help that is out of scope for the support that you provide, right? Sometimes a student might actually need to see somebody who is maybe a professional in mental health. They might need somebody who is maybe a professional in physical health, right? We've talked many times about the bell curve of health and remote wellness, and we've talked about that, right? And there's people on either end of the spectrum here, right? There are people who actually need medical professionals who need help, right? And there are people out there who are extremely elite that need people who are elite coaches, right? People who are actually into a lot of the data side of things. Now, luckily, the vast majority of the population is not in that boat, right? However, there might be some students that you come across that, yes, you're able to help them in your first transformation program, but as you realize, man, you know what? This might be something that I need to go ahead and maybe outsource. I need to go ahead and send them somewhere else. I need to recommend them somewhere else. Now, obviously, the more you get into your career as a remote wellness practitioner, you're eventually going to have a Rolodex of other people that you can go ahead and recommend, right? Now, in the beginning, that might not be the case, but over time, you're going to develop this. But that is the second situation in which a student might actually not be a good fit for renewal and you decide not to work with them anymore, right? And then on top of that, there's a number of other reasons where you might decide not to work with the student anymore as well, okay? But the big thing to remember here is that the best next student that you will have is the one that you are currently working with. And so don't be so quick to say, you know what, I'm not going to renew with this student. I would really try and assess, okay, is this student really falling into these circumstances and these situations in which we're not going to work together anymore, right? Because you want to try as much as possible to be able to renew the student. However, the biggest thing you always have to keep in mind is that this is based on if it is the best fit for the student. At the end of the day, we're not out here to go ahead and try to help people that we are not actually helping, right? At the end of the day, we are here to actually provide value and actually serve and actually help individuals, okay? And so if you realize that you are not the best fit, but you're just trying to keep them with you for making a quick buck, I'm telling you it's going to catch up with you, okay? And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are doing what is in the best interest of the student, and that is the most paramount thing that you can do, okay? And so if you realize the student is not coachable, or if they need help that's out of scope or any other reason, you can go ahead and decide not to renew them. But you can also try to balance that with making sure that, hey, if this is something that I can help the student with, then obviously that's going to be a student that you are going to be able to have a renewal conversation with, okay? So that was an important note that I did want to go ahead and make in terms of what are some of the situations and circumstances in which you might not actually renew with a student, okay? So with that being said, next I want to go ahead and talk to you guys about the modified strategy session, okay? Because that is going to be the second piece of this, right? We said completion ritual and then modified strategy session. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the modified strategy session before we actually get into the script and explanation here, because I want you to remember, right? The anatomy of Coaching Call 12 here is going to include practicing that modified strategy session. Now, what is a modified strategy session? And the bigger question is, what is a strategy session in general, right? Now, these are questions that honestly will not make 100% sense to you right now. And the reason for that is because we haven't yet gone through the actual strategy session training. Because if you remember, we're actually doing this in reverse order, right? We're going over the training piece of your transformation product, and that is probably the most intensive piece of it. The community and the support is relatively easy to go ahead and get set up. It's just kind of a quick setup there, right? An explanation of what it actually is. And then we go ahead and talk about the onboarding and kind of how all that works. And then we have the strategy session, right? Now, how this is laid out is we're going to focus on the training piece. The onboarding is very easy to do as well, so we'll kind of table that for a little bit later. And the community piece and the support piece is also easy, so we're going to kind of table that for later as well. So right now you're focusing on the training, which is the coaching calls, and then we're going to be talking about the strategy session because it is a little bit more intense. It requires a little bit more practice from you. And so we haven't yet gotten to the strategy session training, and that is why you might not have a complete understanding of what is the strategy session, how does the strategy session work. And so you're going to have a lot of different questions about that. And so as a result, you're not going to understand the modified strategy session 100% either. And guess what? That's okay. The reason why it's okay is because what you're going to be doing is practicing the mock practice call here in Coaching Call 12. You're going to kind of go through the motions. And then that way, once we actually get to the strategy session training, a lot of this is going to start to make a lot more sense to you, okay? So right now, you are going to have questions around, hey, how do I collect the student's payment, right? What emails do I send them? How do I onboard them, right? What does all of it look like? And then many of you are also most likely going to have a lot of limiting and false beliefs about sales in general that we are going to be addressing in upcoming trainings as well. You're going to have questions like, hey, is this high pressure sales? Am I manipulating people? You know, I'm afraid of selling. I'm not a salesperson. I don't like sales. You know, I right now have no knowledge or skills about sales, and yet I've made up my mind to think that I know everything about sales, and I've decided that sales is not for me. And how can I fix my mindset so that way it serves me and actually doesn't hold me back? That was a little bit of a long-winded question, but you get it, right? A lot of students, unfortunately, have these limiting beliefs, and I want to go ahead and kind of let you know and ease your concerns that don't worry, we will be addressing these in upcoming training, so that way you can understand how sales is actually more like coaching and serving rather than it being something that you're manipulating others with. But we'll go ahead and talk about that in the future. But I just want you to know right now that having all of these questions is completely normal because of the way that we're doing this right now, okay? So the biggest thing is to just make sure that you are practicing what it is that we talk about inside of Practice Coaching Call 12. And then we're going to go so much more into detail about sales and how to deliver an effective strategy session in upcoming trainings. Of course, the reason why this is so important to make sure that you are familiar with is because, like we talked about in the previous training, the 3 benefits of renewal, right? I'm going to go through this quick because we've already gone through it, but you want to understand that maximizing your ability to understand, hey, this is how a renewal happens, and I need to get better at renewals, is because renewals, number one, require you to grow. And then after that, we went ahead and talked about how renewals actually stabilize income. They're very, very, very important for income and business purposes. And then renewal allows for that topic expansion, right? We've talked about how you're going to be walking your student through about 2 to 3 health transformation nutrition specifically. And then over time, you are going to be able to kind of expand outside of health, right? After that 6 to 9 month range of you primarily focusing on health, then you can use tools like the Wheel of Wellness and start really introducing other aspects of life as well to be able to really go ahead and master that. And of course, we went ahead and talked about how RWA is committed to providing you as much support as you need in your journey as a remote wellness practitioner to really be able to expand outside of health as well, right? So don't worry, in an upcoming phase, when we talk about phase number 2 of the Remote Wellness Academy program, we're going to be walking you through how to make $100,000 plus per year with as few as 20 students, and then maximizing renewals and all of that kind of stuff as well. Okay, so that is coming. That is going to be something that we are going to be discussing, but right now you want to mainly focus on the health piece of things, so that way you can understand, okay, I got to renew my student and they got to focus on the health piece for right now. Okay, and then of course we did talk about, hey, if you do have that limiting belief, that false belief that is not serving you about how you have nothing to offer, you want to keep in mind that you yourself are learning and growing, and so you are most equipped to help people like who you used to be. And so there are so many people out there who are exactly the way that you used to be. And so as you start to learn and grow yourself, that is the beauty of this profession, is that there are so many people out there who are looking for that support. Imagine if over the course of your entire career as a remote wellness practitioner, you were able to have people who say, yes, I dealt with that person. That individual changed my life. Imagine how powerful that is, right? And so you are most equipped to help the people like you used to be. Of course, we as remote wellness practitioners provide curated information, because that is the cost of having so much information out there. If you went ahead and typed on Google, hey, how to lose weight, how to get healthier, how to make more money, right? How to have better relationships, how much information is out there? And so when there is so much out there, guess what? It basically means nothing. And so then when you're actually part of a program, and you're actually part of somebody who's a coach, and you're actually part of some kind of curriculum, that is when the information is curated for you, so that way you can actually implement it and practice it, okay? And then on top of that, of course, we do specialize in the becoming process, because ultimately that is how we as remote wellness practitioners are able to make sure that we cement what the student is learning from that curated information, and then actually being able to have that permanent transformation inside of their life, okay? So of course, from there, we've talked about what renewal might look like, and how we're going to actually talk about module 6 and all of the details from there as well. And then you can mix and match all of the different coaching exercises and all of that kind of stuff. And then of course, remember, hey, even if it is the same program, even if we were to go ahead and repeat it, it would be different because of the fact that the student is not the same person that they used to be. Okay, so those are all of the notes that we wanted to go ahead and talk about. The modified strategy session, we went ahead and talked about what the renewal looks like, just as a recap, because it is very important to remember that humans need to be reminded more than they need to be taught. I know sometimes a lot of students are like, man, Coach Yasin, you just say the same thing over and over and over again. Well, guess what? That level of uncomfortability, you're like, man, I've heard this 1,000th time. That's exactly what allows it to stick in your mind, because once you get to that point, if I say only 1 or 2 times, I'm telling you, I've been an educator for over 15 years. I've seen it over and over and over again, is that when you say something 1 or 2 times, it doesn't stick in the mind of the student unless you actually barrage it over and over and over again to the point where you're annoyed and you're like, okay, finally, I get it. And that point of annoyance, right? That point of like, oh man, I've heard this 10, 15, 20 times. That's when it actually starts to stick. And so that's why we go ahead and do this over and over and over again, so that way you truly understand what it is that we are talking about at a deep level, okay? From there, I want to go ahead and talk about the student action notes. And of course, this coaching call is going to have student action notes as well. And so inside of the resources for this training, you are going to find the student action notes that have 2 pages. So make sure that you are cognizant of that. Of course, we're going to be talking about how to send that to the student in the future. And then the difference here for coaching call number 12 is that there is no coaching call guide, because there's not as many images. There's not that much that they need to actually refer to. So there is no coaching call guide for this specific coaching call, okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the actual explanation. Make sure you are zooming in and zooming out, and then making sure that you are practicing ditching the script. That is very important as well, okay? So let's go ahead and finally hop into coaching call number 12, the explanation of it. Of course, we are going to be starting off with the rapport that is going to be extremely custom to how you are doing that with your student. And then from there, of course, we are going to be going ahead and getting into part 1, which is what's going well. We're going to go ahead and check in with how things have been going with the student. From there, we go ahead and start coaching around challenges and obstacles that the student might be having. I know at this point, you're doing so many practice coaching calls, you might be saying, okay, this is starting to get redundant, but make sure that you are actually doing this and changing it up for your partner, so that way you guys can both actually get the practice back and forth from there, okay? So that is going to be part number 2, which is coaching around challenges and obstacles. And then we go ahead and get into the new information piece of practice coaching call number 12, which is going to be the completion ritual. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the explanation of the completion ritual first. And then after that, we will go ahead and talk about the scripting of that. So what is the completion ritual? The completion ritual is an activity in which we walk the student through going over the major lessons as they close out their 90-day transformation. Okay, so this is an activity that we walk the student through regardless of if they are going to be continuing with us or not. However, there is a big note in regards to how fast we go through the completion ritual, because how much time you spend on the completion ritual is going to depend on if you actually plan on having the student renew or not, okay? Because this completion ritual can be expanded or contracted depending on if you actually need to get to the other piece of this, which is the modified strategy session. And so if you do not plan on renewing with the student, then you can actually go ahead and spend more time on the completion ritual. However, if you do plan on having that renewal conversation, if you do plan on walking the student through the modified strategy session, then you are going to want to make sure that you are keeping track of the time and you are making sure that you are going through this specific completion ritual a little bit faster. Okay, so that's going to be very important for you to understand. And then obviously, as we start to go through the scripting of this completion ritual, you're going to start to get a better idea of how to actually run this. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk to Tina here and let's go ahead and walk her through the actual completion ritual. So we go ahead and say, okay, cool, Tina. So today we're going to go ahead and switch gears a little bit because it is graduation day, right? You made it through the 90-day transformation program, which is a very big deal. The biggest thing to remember during this is that becoming the healthiest version of Tina, becoming the healthiest version of yourself, and becoming your version 2.0 is not going to be something that happens overnight, and it is going to require constant work in order to actually become that version of yourself. Okay, so to close out your 90-day transformation program, we're going to go ahead and do an activity called the completion ritual. Okay, you're going to see this activity inside of your student action notes as well. Do you see that right now? Do you have your student action notes pulled up? Yes, I have my student action notes pulled up. Awesome. Okay, cool. So what we're going to go ahead and do is that inside of your student action notes, you're going to see that there's a question that says, what are the most empowering lessons or realizations that I am going to walk away with from the program that I just went through? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and dump as many of those lessons that come to your mind. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and walk you through kind of like an overview, a quick overview of what we did over the last 12 weeks. And then you can go ahead and dump as many lessons that come to mind in that top section of your student action notes. Does that make sense? Yes. And then after we go ahead and dump that, we're going to then go ahead and organize those lessons into the top 5 lessons, and then we can go ahead and discuss those together. Does that sound good? Yes, that sounds good. Awesome. So let's go ahead and talk about the first couple coaching calls that we had. Coaching call number 1 was all about, clearing the clutter. Coaching call number 2, I'm breaking frame here to talk to you guys as RWA students. Coaching call number 2 was, what to eat and water. And coaching call number 3 was all about sleep. Now remember, we're not getting married to the specific outline and to the specific topics. And so the reason why these are in parentheses over here is because you are going to need to keep track of, okay, what did I talk to this specific student about in the one-on-one format? So that way you can actually go ahead and fill in, okay, coaching call number 1 was this, coaching call number 2 was this, coaching call number 3 was this. But obviously for Tina, this was the order of the topics that we discussed. And so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of mention them here. And we say, cool. So out of those 3, what were some of the lessons that stood out to you the most? And then obviously she's going to go ahead and dump the lessons that she got from those. And then cool, let's go ahead and talk about the next 3. And so the next 3 coaching calls that we went ahead and talked about was call number 4 was all about the dark force holding you back. Call number 5 was all about designing your version 2.0 self. And then call number 6 was all about becoming your version 2.0 self and the becoming journal and the becoming process, right? So Tina, what stood out to you the most from those coaching calls? And now I'm going to break frame and talk to you guys as RWA students, is that if this is not enough to be able to jog the student's memory, you can actually go ahead and have like a small sentence as well to go ahead and remind them, like, remember we talked about this, remember we talked about that. And so this is kind of where you can ad-lib if you find that the student is really struggling to be able to remember and recall exactly what those different coaching calls were about. And then again, of course, here's another reminder that the reason why these are in parentheses here is because you are going to be tweaking this according to what it is that you talked to that specific student about, okay? And then from there, you go ahead and jog their memory again. Coaching call number, 7 was about this, 8 was about this, 9 was about this. What stood out to you in regards to those 3? And then of course from there, hey, 10 was about this and 11 was about this. What stood out to you about that? Now, the reason why we group these is because if you went ahead and stopped and said, okay, coaching call number 1 was about clearing the clutter. What were the lessons that stood out to you from that specific coaching call? What's going to end up happening is that if you go coaching call by coaching call by coaching call, it's going to take a lot of time to be able to dump these lessons, and the student's going to have like 3 or 4 lessons per coaching call. And so what you can do is this is how you can actually expand and contract by literally grouping the different coaching calls together and say, okay, what were the 3 lessons or 4 lessons that stood out to you from these 3 coaching calls, from these 6 coaching calls, right? So you're grouping them so that way the student has less lessons that they can actually pick from. Otherwise, if you go coaching call by coaching call, it's going to be like a massive list that the student is actually pulling lessons from them. Okay, so that is kind of a pro tip there in terms of actually grouping them, so that way you can actually compress and contract according to, or expand and contract according to what actually needs to happen with the student. Okay, now the other pro tip on here is that if the student is coming up with vanilla lessons or kind of saying things that are not really that impactful, they're not really saying things that are really, really profound lessons, then what you can actually do is you can actually provide some kind of starter lessons for the student and kind of give some examples and say, some examples of lessons that past students have shared on this coaching call where, hey, this was this, this was this, this was this. And so you're kind of giving examples of different lessons that that were very impactful during the process that you were with the student, but the student is just not recalling them right now. So you can kind of go ahead and provide those examples for the student there. Okay, so in terms of the explanation for this section, the biggest thing here that you want to know is that this is going to be slightly different from the new norm and the self-acknowledgement exercise because of the fact that you're actually asking about lessons rather than asking exactly what the student's acknowledgement was for those things, right? So there's going to be a little bit of overlap there, but it's kind of like instead of celebrating wins, we're collecting lessons, okay? Here also you are going to be able to do curious exploration depending on if you want to go ahead and spend more time with the student. If this is a student that you are not going to be renewing with, you can go ahead and really expand this section out. And then of course over here as well, the pro tip about overviewing the coaching calls, that's what we talked about here when we talk about kind of providing those overviews so that way the student can go ahead and kind of have their memory jogged and kind of remember, okay, this is exactly what it is that we talked about. And then of course we did go ahead and talk about being able to provide examples as well if the student is giving lessons that are not as impactful. That's what we call vanilla lessons, right? Things that are just kind of, hey, this is not something special. Let's go ahead and have you dig a little bit deeper to be able to find lessons that were more impactful for you. Okay, so this is this section in terms of dumping the lessons with the student. That's going to be the first part that you actually do with the student when we talk about the completion ritual. From there, you go ahead and then walk the student through picking the top 5 lessons from the dump that they went ahead and collected. Okay, so what's happening here is that the student from that previous section is dumping all of the different lessons that they had, and then from that list, they're then going to go ahead and pick the 5 lessons that were the most impactful for them over the last 90 days. Okay, now the big thing here is that you want to go ahead and help your student reframe these lessons so that way they are more in a positive connotation, right? You want to go ahead and ask them, hey, how might we be able to make this lesson even more empowering? So that way it's actually more positive, right? And this is going to be a reference to you being able to understand the reframing training that we talked about in the past as well, because you don't want to go ahead and have the student focusing on the negatives, right? Because remember, the subconscious mind does not think of the opposite. So if you tell your subconscious mind, hey, I don't want to be broke, I don't want to be divorced, I don't want to be, XYZ, the brain doesn't understand that. And all it hears is, okay, you're going to be broke, you're going to be poor, you're going to be unhealthy, right? And so instead, what you got to do is you got to feed the subconscious mind the positive. You always got to focus on what it is that you do have, so that way your brain can actually get more of what it is that you are making gratitude for. And so if I say, hey, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant, what does your mind do? It thinks about a pink elephant. And so in the same way, instead of it being, hey, don't go to sleep randomly, or hey, don't do XYZ, it's like reframing that to say, okay, hey, focus on going to sleep at a time that is a little bit better for you, right? And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about actually reframing in a way that is more positive, so that way the student is actually focusing on the lessons in a way that sticks inside of their subconscious mind. Okay, so that is what we're going to be doing here. We're going to go ahead and help them pick the top 5 lessons, and how you're going to do that and the scripting around that is going to be like, okay, hey, what would you say is the number 1 lesson that you're taking away from the last 90 days? Then you go ahead and go back and forth with them, let them decide what that is, right? Help them reframe whatever that might look like. And then, hey, what about number 2? What was the second most impactful lesson that you're taking away in the last 90 days, right? And so what you do is you go ahead and repeat that all the way through. So you go top lesson number 1, top lesson number 2, top lesson number 3, top lesson number 4, top lesson number 5, and you're walking the student through that. Okay, so once you've actually gone ahead and decided what the top 5 lessons that the student is going to have, then what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and discuss, and you're going to take some time here and say, okay, let's go ahead and talk about exactly why lesson number 1 was so impactful for you. Now, you can see here the completion ritual. This is what I was saying, is that the completion ritual can be expanded or contracted according to how much time you want to be able to take with the student. So you want to make sure that you are keeping an eye on the time to make sure that if you want to have that modified strategy session with the student, that is also going to take a significant amount of time. And so you want to make sure that you are actually budgeting the time properly, so that way you are not actually actually going over. Okay, so that is going to be this part here where you actually go ahead and discuss the top 5 lessons with the student, and then the student is actually going to go ahead and take notes of that in terms of, hey, from this lesson I learned this is the discussion points that we went ahead and took away from all of this. Okay, so that is going to be this section when we talk about the completion ritual. And then here you can also go ahead and talk to the student about the mission and the benefit to others, especially if you're not going to be continuing with the student. You can go ahead and kind of have them plant those seeds that, hey, everything that you've learned inside of this program, you can go ahead and talk to others about it. You can go ahead and start helping others have transformation in their life as well. But again, remember, this is just fuel for the fodder. You're just kind of putting this here. If the student is not going to be renewing with you, this is how you can actually expand the completion ritual. So this is going to be up to you to be able to ad lib and ditch the script to be able to figure out if it is appropriate for you to actually utilize this. Okay, so that is that piece right there. And then we go ahead and close out the completion ritual. And so if the student is no longer going to be continuing with you, then you go ahead and skip the next part and you go ahead and go over to the closing part of the script. And then if the student is going to be continuing with you, then you go ahead and say, cool, so this activity is always so awesome to be able to extract all of the amazing lessons on this final coaching call in your first 90-day transformation program. So you see it's a little bit of a seed there because we're saying first, right? But it's not the end yet, Tina, okay? And so I want to go ahead and right now talk to you about what's next. Sound like a plan? Awesome. Let's go ahead and transition into the actual modified strategy session. Okay, so this is what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to talk about the modified strategy session right now. So the modified strategy session starts off with the transition and the permission. Okay, now just a reminder, I'm going to go through the script here in just a second, but just as a reminder, we are going to have a separate strategy session training coming up in which we're going to address a lot of different questions. And so don't go out there and kind of beat yourself up because of the fact that you think that, oh, sales is a certain way and you haven't ever really learned what sales actually is. Okay, so we're going to walk you through that in an upcoming training, so don't worry too much about that right now. But the biggest thing right now is you just want to go ahead and start having that conversation using the modified strategy session script, the way that we're going to go ahead and do that, so that way you can go ahead and really get that practice going in. And then the other thing to also keep in mind is that because we've actually been seeding this conversation throughout a lot of different coaching calls in the past, this is not going to be something that comes out as a surprise to the student. It's not like, hey, surprise, we're not going to talk about, renewing your program. This is something that the student has been seeded for a very long time. And so as a result, they are going to be expecting having this conversation if you have not had that conversation with them yet. Okay. And so that is what we're going to be talking about here when we talk about the modified strategy session. I'm going to walk you through the actual permission piece of this, and then I'm going to go ahead and explain it to you as well. So you're going to go ahead and talk to Tina, right? So as we spoke about in the previous coaching call, when we talked about the new norm, there are topics that we were unable to, Tina, talk about when you first started your transformation because of the fact that you didn't have the foundations that were needed in order for us to be able to have that conversation, right? You were not the same person as you are right now 3 months ago. And so now that we have this new perspective, now that we have gone through that initial foundation, we can have a completely different conversation of where you want to go in life with this new momentum, right? Because we've made a lot of progress with this momentum in the last 90 days. And I'm pretty sure that you want to keep this momentum going, right, Tina? Yes. Okay, awesome. So let's go ahead and talk about what it looks like for us to be able to continue with that progress and continue getting results. Sound fair, right? You see the tonality there? Sound fair? Sound fair enough, right? And so you're going ahead and getting that permission to be able to have that conversation. Now, that permission piece is what is actually very important, is what we call it in sales, is being able to get that permission so that way it kind of eases the tension in terms of being able to have that conversation with the student because of the fact that they are actually allowing us to be able to get that permission instead of us going in there and just kind of vomiting on them or soliciting without that permission, right? So when we ask the permission, it's an invitation, and guess what? They can take it or they can leave it. We're all adults here, right? We're all dealing with adults here. And so it's an invitation to say, hey, I have this other thing that we can talk about, this sneak peek of what's to come. Do you want to have a conversation about that? And it's up to them if they decide that they want to say yes or no. And so that's why there is no high pressure sales. There is no manipulation that's going on here. We're doing what is in the best interest of the student, and the student is in control this entire time. Okay, so that is very important to understand. And I want to go ahead and emphasize this as we're getting into this. Of course, we are going to be talking more about about this in the upcoming strategy session training as well. So all we're doing is that we're allowing the student to realize that there is another program where they can continue to work with us and get ongoing support and accountability to be able to have deeper and deeper levels of transformation. Okay, so that is the first piece of this specific modified strategy session when we talk about the transition and the permission. From there, we go ahead and go into a strategy session piece that is called the discovery part of a strategy session. Okay, now the discovery part of a strategy session is we go ahead and really open up and identify the current situation and the desired situation of the student. And so this graphic here that you have been exposed to when we talk about the becoming process is exactly the same graphic that we utilize when we talk about the strategy session. Because inside of the discovery piece of the strategy session, we need to first clearly identify what the current situation of the student is, and then we need to identify the desired situation, so that way in the strategy session we can position ourselves as the solution, as the bridge that is going to allow them to be able to get to their desired situation. Okay, so when we talk about this in the modified strategy session, it's not exactly the way that it's going to be in the actual strategy session training. It is very similar, but what we do is we first go ahead and work on identifying the current situation. Now luckily we've already gone ahead and done all the work in order to actually help the student identify this. So we go ahead and start off and say, hey, remember when we did that wheel of health activity? You mentioned that some of the deficits that you had, do you remember what those were? And then the student goes ahead and replies with some of the deficits that they had. And this is where it's actually very important to make sure that you have those good notes, so that way you can actually be ready to list some of the deficits that the student had in that previous coaching call. So make sure you are having all of your notes for that wheel of health activity. Okay, so then from there, once we've actually identified the current situation, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're actually going to go ahead and explore the current situation. We're really going to go ahead and really expand that pain of the current situation and where the student is currently, right? So we said, okay, cool. Just like we talked about, and when we explored those deficits, the reasons you told me that those deficits were so impactful for you right now was 1, 2, 3. Is that right? Student confirmed and clarified. So building on that, Tina, talk to me, right? We went ahead and did the avoiding Niagara syndrome in health activity from the previous coaching call. So talk to me about that, right? What did you see that if you do not continue making the changes that you have made over the last 12 weeks in your life, what is your life going to look like if you just stop right here? If you don't actually continue with the process of this health transformation, what is your life going to look like 5 years from now? And are you okay with that? So you'll see what we're doing here. I'm breaking frame to talk to you guys as RWA students, is that we're really going ahead and expanding that current situation and allowing the student to realize at the forefront of their mind that their current situation is not ideal. And if they don't continue making the changes that they have made over the last 11, 12 weeks with us, then they're going to end up in this situation that they don't want to be in 5 years from now. Okay, so that is the first piece of this, when we actually go ahead and identify the current situation. And then once we've actually identified the current situation, we're then going ahead and really kind of putting the pain in there on the current situation. And this is not in any manipulation. We're helping the student realize themselves what is important for them, right? Because a lot of times we as human beings just walk around with Niagara syndrome and we don't realize, oh man, the current situation that I'm in is not something that is ideal for me. And unless they actually do an activity, unless somebody actually helps pull that out of us, we don't actually realize like, oh man, I need to continue to make sure that I'm making these changes in my life. Otherwise, if I stop this, my future situation 5 years from now is going to be at a place that I am not happy with. And then from there, once we've actually gone ahead and identified and explored the current situation, we're now going to go ahead and turn the focus over to the desired situation. So similarly, exactly like we talk about it in the diagram, we have the current situation and then we have the desired situation. So what we did just now is we identified the current situation, right? Which was exactly the deficits that the student had. And then we explored those. We dug deep into those, right? And then what we're going to go ahead and do is now we're going to identify the desired situation. And then we're going to go ahead and dig deep into that. And so what we're doing here is we're creating this gap that is going to allow us in the strategy session to be able to position ourselves as the solution to this gap between the pain and the pleasure that the student actually wants to experience. And guess what? Exactly the same way that we did with the deficits in the current situation, we've already gone ahead and planted the seeds and laid the groundwork for the desired situation as well in the previous coaching call when we actually talked about the health North Stars, right? So again, you're going to pull up your notes and you're going to go ahead and say, cool, well, do you remember what your number one North Star was? What was the outcome that you wanted to focus on in the next 90 days? Or another question that you can go ahead and ask here is, okay, if we could wave a magic wand and you could really get what you wanted in the next 90 days, what would that look like? And so you're going ahead and leveraging a lot of the work that you did with the Health North Stars, because that is going ahead and really identifying the desired outcome, okay? And then what we're going to go ahead and do, again, we're going to go ahead and explore the desired outcome. So in the same way that we explored the current situation, we kind of dug deep into that, right? We really dug deep on the pain of the current situation. We're now going to go ahead and expand and dig deep on the desired outcome. But instead of digging deep and making it like painful, we're making it extremely, extremely attractive, right? Hey, why is that important for you? What is that going to feel like? Imagine if you actually had that outcome 90 days from now, right? Fill in what it is that they wanted. What would your life look like if you actually achieved that? And so we're expanding that. Now remember, we've already done this in the previous coaching call. So you're just kind of bringing everything that we already talked about. You don't want to be redundant and talk about it again in the same way, but you're kind of overviewing it. So that way, when it comes time for the student to have to make a decision, it's something that is at the forefront of their mind. Even though you already discussed it, don't assume that the student is thinking about it immediately right now, okay? So this is going to be where you go ahead and use curious exploration, conscious listening, paraphrasing, and verbal mirroring. These are all skills that we talked about in a coaching context, but they are all absolutely relevant inside of the strategy session as well. See how it all comes together? This is what we're talking about when you're actually learning skills that are part of the skill stack that help you in multiple areas of your income and your business, okay? So you're going to make sure that you are using curious exploration here. That's not something that we can script for you. That's going to be something that you are going to have to dynamically pull from as you understand the principle behind what it is that we are doing, okay? From there, we go ahead and hop into the problems and challenges. And so, okay, cool. Thank you so much, Tina, for sharing that with me. So what do you feel is your biggest struggle with insert the desired outcome, right? Hey, what is your biggest struggle with having more energy so you can play with your kids more, right? Whatever it is, right? And then what's stopping you or slowing you down from having that desired outcome right now? So again, we're kind of expanding on that desired outcome, and we're starting to position ourselves as the solution, as the bridge between their current situation and their desired situation. Now, a quick note here, a lot of times in sales and a lot of times in strategy sessions, we actually ask the question in multiple different ways and kind of sometimes back to back, because sometimes different people are going to resonate with different types of questions, right? So a lot of times it's kind of like similar questions, but asked in different ways. And then you go ahead and curiously explore, tell me more about that. What do you mean by that? And so you're really going ahead and opening that gap between the current situation and the desired situation. So that way you can actually go ahead and position yourself as the solution there, right? And then finally, you go ahead and ask, what is the cost of not making that change? So, hey, Tina, obviously you want to make a change, but how important is this to you really, right? What you're doing here is you're really starting to get that commitment. So that way Tina actually admits and verbalizes that this is something that's very important for her, right? And so you ask the question on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being that this is the most important thing, and 1 being that I could care less, what are you, right? And so then the student is going to go ahead and respond, hey, I'm a 4. Okay, awesome. And if they're like, hey, why are you a 4? Why are you a 5? And so what you want to do is you want to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. You want to expand on the pain and expand and explore on the desired outcome until the student is at least at a 4 in terms of how serious they are at making a change. And so if they are at less than a 4, that means that you have not done a good enough job earlier on when you were talking about the pain and the pleasure in order to actually make it something that is serious for the student, right? If somebody says, hey, I'm like a 1, I could care less. I'm a 2, I don't really care about this. I'm a 3, I could care less about this. And so you really want to make sure that you are really putting that importance level, that the student really feels that, okay, this is something that is very, very important for me, because how the human brain works is that if it's not urgent for them, they're not going to actually be able to make a decision. But when you actually ask questions like this, you're pulling from the student that yes, they have admitted that this is something that is urgent for them. And so they are going to have to be able to make a decision when they are actually get to that point, because it is something they've admitted that is very important for them. And then from there, we go ahead and go into the next part, which is just thank you and clarification. Remember, we talked about the importance of thank you and really going ahead and easing the limbic brain there. So, hey, awesome. I appreciate you opening up and sharing with me. I don't feel like I have any more questions to really understand your situation, but is there anything else that you feel like we haven't covered in terms of your current situation and desired situation that we would need to know before we actually continue on? Student Tina says, yeah, whatever, right? If she wants to clarify, you can go ahead and verbally mirror back and forth. And then you get into the actual pitch side of things, okay? And so the pitch is very, very easy. It's very, very simple. So based on everything, Tina, that you've shared with me, I'm excited for us to continue working together towards your goals, because right now you're at insert current situation, and you want to get to insert desired situation, okay? And is that still a reasonable goal that if I helped you get closer, that you're not going to be upset with me about that, right, Tina? I just want to make sure that if I helped you get to where you want to go, you want to be upset? That's kind of like a light joke that we say, and the student says, heck no, right? And so you'll see here what we're doing is that in the pitch, we are positioning ourselves as the solution to their current situation and desired situation, right? And then we go ahead and say, cool. Well, the biggest thing to know is that consistency is key, right? We all need support and accountability. And so let's keep this momentum going and let's keep this progress coming, right? We don't want to have you drop off because you're in such a great groove already. And so this is what we have in store for you, right? You're going to go ahead and share some of the benefits of the next program, the format, what's included. This is stuff that we'll talk about in the future. And so in the next program, we're going to focus on 1, 2, 3. And what you do is you go ahead and fill in all of the deficits that they said that they had in order to help you accomplish the desired outcome. And so you'll see what we're doing here is we're really using what the student told us, what the prospect told us, right? Exactly what it is that they told us that they needed help with, whatever their problems were, wherever they needed value added in their life. The way that this strategy session is designed is to be able to help really take what they told you that they needed help with, and you are positioning yourself as the solution to their problem. So, hey, in this next program, we're going to focus on 1, 2, 3, which was the deficits that they had. And we're going to go ahead and help you make sure that we can help you get to your desired outcome. And that's it. It's literally just as simple as that. That's what the pitch is. And that's how you actually position yourself as the solution. Now, it's very important to understand here is that when we get to this point and we see, you know what, maybe I am not the best fit for this specific person, right? You can't go out there and make promises to people that you are actually going to be able to help them get to where they want to go, and you're not actually able to do that, right? That's unethical. And so you got to make sure that this psychology that we're talking about, when we talk about the psychology of sales and persuasion and influence, and the way that we're kind of laying it out for you here briefly in the modified strategy session, and the way you're going to learn it more in the actual strategy session training, it is extremely, extremely, extremely powerful. And so you need to be careful not to position yourself as a solution to a problem that you are not actually able to solve, because these psychology principles are so powerful that a student is going to say, yes, you're going to help me get to where it is that I want to go. And so what you're doing here is that you might even find that the student gets emotional of their current situation and their desired situation, right? It's something that is so impactful for them. And then all of a sudden they say, wow, this person is literally speaking the exact same words that I'm having issues with. This person is a godsend. This person is an angel. This person is going to help me get to where I want to go. Right? But then all of a sudden, if you're being manipulative, if you're not actually being honest, if you're not actually being ethical, then you're not actually serving the student at the highest level. And so there might be students that, whether that be here at the modified strategy session level, or there's prospects who have not yet dealt with you when you actually talk about getting new students who, you know what, you are not actually the best person that can help them. And so you need to make sure that you are being ethical and you're not using these principles around psychology of persuasion and influence and sales and all this kind of stuff to really go out there and make money in a way that is not serving the person in the way that they need to be served. And so all of that is very important that I did want to go ahead and mention here when we talk about the pitch. You'll see it's very, very easy. It's very, very light. And we're just positioning ourselves as the solution to the problems that they told us that they already have. And then from there, we go ahead and talk a little bit about onboarding. This is called future pacing in sales. When you actually future pace before you ask for the close, right? Before you talk about the pricing, before you actually talk about whether they want to join or not, what you do is you do a little bit of future pacing here and you talk about the onboarding. So that way the student or the prospect can already start to imagine that once they invest, that uncertainty of what happens next is already solved in their mind, right? So, hey, once you renew your program, we're going to go ahead and schedule another goal setting session where we're going to go ahead and put together a step-by-step game plan to help you get to insert the desired situation, the desired outcome that they want in the next 90 days. Does that make sense? And so all of a sudden you've already future paced, hey, we're going to assume that you're already going to renew your program. And this is what it's going to look like when you renew your program. And so therefore, this is another psychology principle around influence and persuasion that is going ahead and having the student future pace. So that way they're like, okay, cool, I am going to make this decision. And this is what it's going to look like after I do that. And then we go ahead and get into the actual close of the strategy session here. We say, cool, well, the investment around that in order to help you get to your goals, remember, we're going ahead and doing future pacing here and say, hey, this is what it's going to cost in order to be able to get to your desired outcome and help you maintain a sustainable lifestyle, comes out to a one-time investment of $2,400. Now, would you want to take care of that as a whole, or would you want to split that up into payments? Which do you prefer? and then you just basically shut up. Now, this is very important. We're going to talk more about this when we get to the strategy session, but it's very important that after you actually present the price to the potential student, or in this case, the student who's been with you, you do not say a word after that. You want to let the other person make the decision and be able to actually sit there with the decision that they need to make without you interrupting. Okay, we're going to talk more about this in the strategy session, but I do want to go ahead and mention that because a lot of newbie amateur remote wellness practitioners, because they are uncomfortable with having the student actually make a decision, what they'll do is they'll say this close, and then all of a sudden they'll start to speak about it. It's like, oh, da, 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 da. And then all of a sudden the student is not able to think clearly and make a decision. Now, of course, the pricing we're going to talk about in the future as well when we talk about how to price your program and what all of that looks like. But the close is very important, and it is an art that you will get better at doing. But again, right now, just make sure that you are practicing and going through the mock call piece of this, okay? And then from there, the student's going to make a decision. They're going to say, yes, I would like to renew with you. Cool. Well, hey, let's go ahead and take care of all of that right now. You're going to go ahead and onboard the student. This is going to be an amazing thing that you've decided, Tina, for yourself. I'm super excited for you to get started with your next 90-day transformation program. You made a fantastic decision. It's very important to make sure that you reassure the student of their decision because they're kind of in that vulnerable state. So let's go ahead right now, Tina, and schedule our next coaching call together so we can get you rocking and rolling towards your insert desired outcome, right? And you kind of do some small talk while you're processing the payment, getting everything rocking and rolling, okay? So that is going to be how this entire flow and the structure for the modified strategy session works. Now, there is another piece of sales and influence and persuasion and the strategy session, which is called obstacle overcome, right? What if the student says they want to think about it? What if they're not sure? What if they have questions? What if they say they got to talk to their spouse? How do you actually overcome those obstacles? Those are all going to be things that we talk about in upcoming training sessions where you're going to have a complete understanding of influence, persuasion, and sales. Before right now, for the purposes of Practice Coaching Call 12, do not worry about that right now. You just want to kind of go through the motions, and then that way in the future, we are going to have more extensive training on that. Beautiful. So that is the modified strategy session script and the explanation with that as well. I'm really excited for you to go ahead and practice that so you can go ahead and get the reps in specifically for that. From there, we go ahead and get into the actual action steps. Now, remember, the action steps are going to be if the student renews, because you're not going to be giving action steps to a student that you're not going to actually be working with after that. Now, potentially you could. I can see where there might be some possibility there where you actually give action steps to a student where they can continue on their own. But typically the action steps are going to be if the student actually renews with you. Okay, so action step number 1 typically is going to be some sort of onboarding action step. Hey, you're going to have this kind of worksheet. We're going to have this kind of intake form. We're going to go ahead and set this up for the next step. We're going to talk about that in the future. Action step number 2 is all going to be about getting the ball rolling. So it's going to be some sort of action step related to their desired outcome and kickstarting their next 90-day transformation program. And then action step number 3 is really empowering the student to be able to create their own action steps. Like, hey, what could we do this week to prepare you for your next transformation program? So that way you can actually go ahead and get the ball rolling on that. So you empower them to be able to make a decision from there. Okay, so that is the action steps. We then go ahead and get into the actual closing of everything. You'll notice that we don't actually talk about the ahas, takeaways, and appreciations here because of the fact that we already kind of did a lot of lessons. We kind of talked a lot about, the modified strategy session. There is no ahas, insights, takeaways, or appreciations. However, there is a closing, and the closing is going to depend on if the student is not continuing with you or if the student is continuing with you. Okay, so if the student is not continuing with you, then what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are, wishing them the best of luck. You're showing them gratitude for the fact that they were on this journey with you. There's a little bit of a scripting there. Hey, Tina, I want you to know it has been an absolute honor and a privilege, and you want to be genuine about this. It has been an absolute honor and privilege to have been able to work with you over the last 90 days. I'm really excited for you and what you're going to accomplish in the future with all these new tools and new skills that you've learned over the last 90 days. Wishing you the best of luck. Take care, right? So that's kind of if the student is not continuing. And if the student is continuing, you want to make sure that you are setting a specific date exactly the same way that you would do in the previous coaching calls, except this time it's going to be to kickstart the next transformation program from there. Okay, so that is the actual closing piece of Practice Coaching Call number 12 and how we actually go ahead and close this out. And that is the explanation and the script around that as well. Of course, as we kind of close out Practice Coaching Call number 12 for you, here's a reminder to make sure that you are ditching the script at this point. You've gone ahead and done enough of these coaching coaching calls and you have done enough preparation that you should go ahead and start getting used to being able to ditch the script. Remember, do not be a remote control student. Even though we are providing you the foundation and the guidance, this is the done for you, do it yourself approach. You want to make sure that you are taking the initiative to be resourceful, you are taking the initiative to be creative, and then that is the way that you are going to actually be able to progress and make sure that you are able to actually innovate on your own. Because remember, we at RWA are giving you what we find works best, but there's a high likelihood that you're going to be able to experiment and maybe even find things and explain things in a way that we have not even thought about. And it's going to be maybe 10 times better than the way that we talk about it. And you're only going to be able to do that once you actually start to innovate and experiment and go out on your own and be able to do this, right? So remember, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And so we're not special. All we did was do the action and the repetition to be able to find this system out. And now we're giving you the fruits of that, so that way you can go ahead and take the action and find out what works best for you. And then you share it with the rest of the RWA community. And that's how we actually get better and better and better together as a community and as a family. Okay, so that is a quick note in terms of ditching the script. Of course, remember the pillars of your transformation program. We're talking about the training, the coaching calls right now. We will be talking about the community and the support in upcoming trainings. With that being said, let's go ahead and talk about practice coaching call number 12. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know at this point you are an absolute pro at this, but just a reminder, you are going to be working with your same partner that you have been working with thus far. However, this is going to be the last coaching call practice that you are going to be doing with that specific partner. Of course, we do understand why practice calls are important. We've talked about this many times in the past. Of course, the instructions for this, make sure you are following the proper step-by-step instructions. Just a couple quick notes about this. This is going to be the last coaching call that you do with your partner here. And so you want to make sure that you are actually exchanging thank you videos, because that is going to be very important that you do that as well. Okay, so you want to make sure that you do that. We have the script provided for you. If you decide that you want to go ahead and do that, make sure you actually do practice, practice, practice. Do not show up to your partner and not having practiced before. Your head is all over the place. You're not doing your pre-call ritual. It is extremely disrespectful because of the fact that your partner is doing their best job to be able to show up as their best self for you. Make sure that you are doing and returning that favor and being respectful of them as well. Okay, so all of that is going to be very, very, very important. Make sure you go ahead and record that thank you video, put that inside of your Student Wins group, and then say goodbye to your partner for now, and then follow the rest of the action steps as well. Okay, of course, we've already talked about how long these should take. Make sure you don't take a gazillion hours to get through this specific module. And remember, I know for a fact that you're going to do great because I've already seen how much effort you as an RWA family put into these practice coaching calls, because you realize that this is something that is going to benefit you for the rest of your life. Even though right now you might say, I got to get through this. But this is going to be something that plants the seeds that is going to give you fruit for the rest of your life as you start to go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, and then eventually get to conscious competence through these practice coaching calls, and through repetition, eventually getting to unconscious competence as well. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about your engagement question for this specific training. We would love to hear from you. How has the last 12 practice calls been for you, right? Now that you're starting to get through pretty much all of the practice training modules that we've designed for our practice student, Tina, what has been some of your biggest takeaways as you've done these reps to find your voice? Remember, we're not 100% done yet. We are still going to be talking about the strategy session. We're still going to be talking about the fruits of your labor and trying to putting everything together in a toolbox. But in terms of actually delivering the practice coaching calls, the 12 ones that you've done over the last period of time that you've been going through this module, what have been some of your biggest takeaways as you've gone through that process? What are the changes that you've noticed within yourself as you've been going through this process as well? From there, let's go ahead and talk about your action steps for this specific training. Of course, you want to make sure that you go ahead and watch and study this training in full. Make sure you go ahead and complete the engagement question for this training, the one that we just went ahead and talked about above. You want to go ahead and make sure that you save the following documents to the appropriate Google Drive folder. Make sure you actually go ahead and prepare your student action notes. Make sure you practice, practice, practice. If you do have questions about this specific practice coaching call, make sure you do go ahead and let us know inside of the student community post for this specific coaching call. Make sure you go ahead and do your practice call with your partner, collect and give your thank you video. Go ahead and post your thank you video in your Student Wins group. Make sure you go ahead and upload your practice coaching call recording to YouTube. Make sure it's unlisted. Make sure you actually go ahead and comment your recording and your takeaways. And so with that being said, this has been practice coaching call number 12. We as the RWA coaches are super, super excited to see your practice call recordings and being able to see how much you are taking away from all of this done for you, do it yourself approach. And so with that being said, this is Coach Yasin checking out, and I will catch you inside of the next training.